welcome. This is awesome. We have a great crowd here. When I said I wanted to do a talk on this topic, I didn't know if 2 people would show up or nobody or what. So it's great that so many have come out to learn about this and hopefully teach me something about this. My name is Barczewski. I'm on the board of directors at the Farm Museum here, but I'm also on the Cecil County Fair Board, Executive Board, President of Cecil County 4-H All-Stars, Vice President of the Tri-State Bottle Club, and lots of other things which keep me way too busy to research a lot of this stuff. So if I had all the time in the world, I would dive more into more of this. But I just thought it was kind of an interesting topic. The way I got into milk bottles, because most people my age don't even know what a milk bottle is. But the way I got into it is my wife actually was a collector of milk bottles. She's from Churchill in Cleveland County, and she had been collecting the Eastern Shore bottles since she was, what, 10? Yeah. So we have a whole milk bottle room in the house. But then when she moved up to Cecil County, started collecting some Cecil County bottles, and then I got interested more in the history side of it, because I really am a history guy, I like history, and kind of was like, well, where was this dairy? Where was this located? Because in addition, another thing I forgot is also the Forgotten Fair Hill, which Emily Kilby's back there, because what Forgotten Fair Hill does, looks at all the 100 farms that made up the Fair Hill Nature Center, and kind of researches the history of all the different places there in the ruins within the park. So this kind of ties into that same thing. I wanted to know where the dairy was, when did it operate, as much as I could find out about it. And interestingly, it is very hard to find information for a lot of these, because some of them only existed for a very short time, and some of them changed names, changed owners, usually just like any business. You think about any business, they go in and out, they change owners, they change names, and it's hard to kind of keep track of everything. So I've done the best I can, and the way this is laid out, I start out at the beginning, just kind of a general overview of dairy and the dairy industry, and then I had to focus in on mainly the bottles, because otherwise this would be like a 10-hour presentation on every dairy farm in Cecil County, and you'll see why I have some numbers with that. Also with farming, I grew up till I was 6. We lived on my grandfather George Moore in Bear, Delaware, his dairy farm, which is where Rockwood Apartments is on Route 40 in Bear now. Lived there till I was 6, then we moved out to my other grandparents' farm on Middle Road in Elkton. Barczewski's had lived there since '69. And so farming, dairy, milk, all that stuff. I showed cows in 4-H, all that kind of stuff. Tied right into the history and the milk bottle thing. So that's the background. But like I said, what I'm going to do is give kind of an overview of dairy in general, kind of like how it's evolved through time, just real briefly. And then I'm going to get into each of the different towns. It's kind of broken down by town and what dairies were in those towns and what I know about them. And I certainly invite anybody that has more information, knows more than I do, because there's a lot of people in this room who know a lot more than I do, I know that. Please share out. I have my buddy Charles in the back. He is filming this, and if he comes around and puts a camera in your face when you're hopefully if you volunteer some information, because I want to collect that. I don't want to forget what you're saying, and I want to try to have that information and update my paperwork and things like that. And I do have a handout in the end that has a lot of this information in it that you can take with you if you're interested. And also I will plug our Tri-State Bottle Club does have a bottle show. I always call it the milk bottle show, but it's really a bottle show. It's not just milk bottles. Milk bottles are actually a small part of it. But that's at Singerly Fire Hall in November, and I have some handouts for that too, if you're interested in collecting bottles yourself. So people would say, well, what the heck's the big deal with a milk bottle? Well, obviously the history. And for a lot of time, a milk bottle was a great thing to use for paint. Yeah. April, can you turn the middle switch on? They were a great thing to use for paint. They were great target practice. You shoot at them in the backyard. And because of that, there's a lot of them that are not around anymore. But those that are around have become kind of highly collectible. The more rare they are, the more collectible they are. And Cecil County had a lot of, like Mount Ararat operated for many years. There's many Marinara bottles. Lawson's was a big one that operated for a long time, a lot of those bottles. But there's a lot of smaller ones as well. And as a business, people would get into it. Maybe they do it for a couple of years, didn't work out, sold it, stopped bottling. A lot of times they had the farm, but they just got out of the bottling part of it, so they might not have had bottles. There were also kind of test bottles. There were, the salesman would come around and say, hey, here's a great bottle with your name on it. Wouldn't you like to buy 1,000 of them, to bottle? And they might say no. A lot of times, they would bottle just in a blank one. Even if they did bottle milk on their farm, it would be a blank bottle with a blank cap, generic. But the ones that are more collectible are obviously the ones with an actual name on it, and it has a town on it that makes it nicer. So, in 1930, they looked back at the agricultural census, which is a really interesting document. They did those every year. From what year to when?
Every 10 years.
Every 10 years, starting like in 1800s, right?
1850, I think.
1850. So, agricultural census every 10 years, and they actually documented what was on every single farm in the country.
How much they produced and
yep, and how much they produced, how much money they made, how much butter they made and sold, and yeah, really interesting. But in 1930, there were 550 dairy farms in Cecil County. That's crazy to think about. 550. That's actually what was really interesting. It had a lot to do with the railroad because it was easy transport. But Cecil County was the 4th biggest in Maryland in terms of counties. Frederick County was the biggest, followed by Hartford actually, and then Carroll County, and then Cecil County was the 4th biggest. So dairies were a very common thing, and you drive around with anybody who has been around Cecil County for a long time, and they'll say, yeah, that was a dairy farm, that was a dairy farm, and they were everywhere here in the county. So this is just kind of a picture of talking about the different kinds of cows. One thing you're going to see is Golden Guernsey. Golden Guernsey was the great hit, major advertising push by the Guernsey Association to push for Golden Guernsey milk. But you also had, of course, the Holstein has become the dominant breed now. There are way more Holsteins than anything else. Brown Swiss is a common breed. The Jersey, which is a high butter fat, a smaller cow, and then Ayrshire is not very common anymore. It used to be pretty common. But those 5 breeds were your big ones, and then Milky Shorthorn as well was a really common breed. That's what my great-grandfather bought, Milky Shorthorns, back in the 20s and 30s and 40s. That was a really common breed. And if you look at what the cows looked like then, all right, I want you to kind of compare that to this next picture and see how everything basically now looks like a Holstein. The breeding has changed, and everything except for the Jersey, which is shorter, everything else pretty much looks like a Holstein now. Because they are the biggest producers, and what are you looking for in a business? Production, right? You want production for as little feed as possible to produce as much milk as possible. Now back to that Golden Guernsey thing. And it's hard to see on this slide, but this is your normal white milk, and this is a Golden Guernsey milk. It actually does have a golden tint. The way that the Guernsey processes the milk in their body, it has extra beta carotene. It actually has a lot of extra nutrients in it as well. And there are dairies still around the country that market specifically Guernsey milk. But places around here, the Guernsey milk goes with everything else, and it ends up quite like all the other milk. But this was a really common thing, and if you've ever wondered, like, what is that? What is Golden Guernsey mean? You see it on a lot of these bottles. It says Golden Guernsey milk. That was a push by the Guernsey Breeders Association. Now Ararat was really known as a Golden Guernsey a dairy, and you'll see that symbol a lot on different things as we go. So, milk delivery. This is not a Cecil County picture, but just an example. Raw milk delivery, that was kind of the way to do it. Before pasteurization, before homogenization became the norm, the standard, it was around, but before it became the standard, it was very common to deliver raw milk. You could still get raw milk in Pennsylvania. It's illegal in Maryland to sell raw milk, but in Pennsylvania you can actually go and get raw milk still if you want, usually from the Amish. But raw milk means it's not pasteurized and not homogenized. And back in the old days, and I want you to picture this in your mind. You got a horse at first going along a dusty road, no paved roads really back then, dusty muddy road, going along. Usually it had a cap on, but not always. Not always a cap on the can. I mean, that's expensive, right? So you got to go along and you're get to the house. And you say, would you like to buy some milk? And the person comes out and says, sure, I'd like to buy some milk. And they bring out their own ladle that their 5-year-old just licked, in the other room. And they dip it down in there, and they get what they need. They pay the farmer. And now, as you can imagine, that was not the most sanitary thing. It's also full of dust and flies and everything else. So that was why this revolution of a milk bottle and a sanitary way to get milk to people was such a big deal. We think of it today. Let me get rid of this thing. You think of today, you kind of take it for granted. But at that time, unless you had milk on your farm that you milked the cows and got the milk straight out and you knew it was clean, as just a regular consumer, you did not know that. And a lot of people did get sick from drinking milk. Milk was not really considered totally safe for a long time. Yes, Emily.
Family story. My great-grandparents had children. They lived in Providence, Rhode Island, and they had a set of twins that they died because they were fed milk delivered that way in town and through one of those bottles with a really long tube, and so they died from infection. Both of the boys died from that.
Yeah, so I'll get rid of my first. But yes, that was a common thing for people to die of milk. I know even my grandfather, my great-grandfather, who came over from Poland. He rented a lot of farms in Wilmington, milk cows. He rented a farm in Bear across from my other grandfather, interestingly enough, before my parents ever met each other. And they had a tuberculosis outbreak, had to kill the whole herd, and that was it. And he moved on, and I think he did farm one other farm, and then he went into having a grocery store. Because it was just such a big deal. If a disease broke out, it wasn't like an antibiotic was readily available like today, and you may have to kill your entire herd and start all over again. So this was a majorly risky business, but there was money to be made in it. And we'll talk a little bit about different bottles. Glass bottles were really first developed in the 1870s, but then kind of this Herbie Thatcher is famous, and a lot of these bottles are Thatcher bottles. They have a little T with each kind of symbol on the bottom of the bottle. They're Thatcher bottles. They came from New York. Prior to that, milk was brought around in those big cans, like kind of this can, like you see over here. That's a Mount Ararat can. And they would go around, deliver it to everybody. Interesting thing that I found, an article in 1948, and this was a big dairy, but it said it took them 13,000 bottles to supply 1,000 customers. Because if you think about, they might get a few bottles, there's some in transport back to be cleaned, there's some in transport back to be out, there's a whole bunch in the warehouse to be cleaned. So it would take like 13 bottles per person, and it would be a 1 in a million chance that you would get the same bottle twice in a big dairy situation. Because it was just constantly rotating in and out, delivery men, all that stuff, constantly in and out. And a bottle usually only lasted 16 trips before it would break. So even in 1948, when the technology had advanced and they were making really good durable bottles, they still only lasted about 16 trips. Because you think they're going back and forth, they're getting washed, they're getting banged around. That was typically the average for a bottle, which is again why they're something more rare. But again, like I said, you use them for target practice, waste oil, gasoline. That's a great thing to drain your engine. Alcohol, I mean, perfect thing. So people then did start collecting bottles, and of course the plastic handled jug that we know today came around in the 60s and kind of put an end to the bottles, because the bottles did survive. People like drinking their glass out of a glass bottle. It's clear glass, so you can see that the reason for that is so you can see that the milk is healthy and clean. That's why it's a clear bottle in most cases, not all the time. But the wax containers and the paper milk jugs, like they've been in and out, but people aren't really know like that. So the plastic milk jug is kind of what ended up replacing the bottle in the 60s. And that change all came around as well with the neighborhood store turned into the grocery store. And you would go to your Acme or whatever, A&P, I guess back then, and go to the grocery store instead of your neighborhood store. And it just changed the whole dynamic of the whole system. One of the ways that they would bottle before they had caps, because caps kind of became the standard, this was a common way to cap. This is a metal top that like secures onto the top of the bottle. This one's a really old one. But I just wanted to show you that's kind of one of the ways that they used to cap bottles back in the day. And then this gets into what I was saying here about some of the early caps. The early caps didn't have a little pull tab on them. You would get your milk and you had to use this little tool, that tool at the top, to pry off your milk cap. And later they developed a cap that had a pry piece with a staple in it. So you could pull it out, pull out the cap, and then reuse it. But those bottles weren't around initially, so everything evolved over time. Types of bottles, you see some over here, which by the way, this is the greatest collection of Cecil County milk bottles ever assembled. Because a lot of them, first of all, we didn't even keep track of like which ones even existed until recently. So Wayne Combs, right here, is the Cecil County milk bottle king. He has way more bottles than even this, but he brought his rare ones that I didn't have. And then over on that side are the ones that I have. And all together, pretty much covers every dairy that we're going to talk about in here. There might be a few that are missing that are super rare. I think we might have all of them. So that is a unique thing to definitely take a look at. Also, there's some bottle caps. Wayne's got some caps, and I have some caps. This first page here are Cecil County dairies specifically that there's caps for. So you have your painted bottles and you have your slug plate bottles. So your slug plate bottles are older. Okay? It has just your basic design, it's not colored. Now if you do look on the bottom of the bottle, often you can find a year. So for instance, this is 42, that means it's a bottle made in 1942. Barczewski bottle. And some people kept using that slug plate from the time they started bottling all the way through and they never changed. Other dairies, which were a little more progressive, ended up getting into the painted bottles. Now these are called Pyroglaze or ACL, which is an applied color label. But those different colors, obviously it makes sense for marketing. It's more attractive, it's shiny, like I look at it, it looks cool, I'm gonna buy that. No different than anything today. And you can see that a lot of those paints fade over time. So it's definitely harder to find a pristine condition painted bottle. That's less common. You can, these slug plate bottles, you can actually put them in a cleaner. You can send them to be cleaned with these little copper balls, kind of like BBs, and they swirl around and actually can clean the bottle and it'll shine up beautifully. The painted ones are a little less common. And the painted bottles started kind of around in the 30s, but in the 40s was definitely the heyday of painted bottle. Tons of painted bottles. That was the common thing. And a lot of dairies also changed their logo all the time. So my grandfather's brother operated West End Dairy in Wilmington. So there's actually an S. Barczewski bottle. Barczewski on the bottle. But they operated West End Dairy in Wilmington, and the funny story from them is that he changed his bottles like he changed his underwear. So he had tons of different bottles. There are so many variations of West End bottles. So that makes collecting those interesting, which I have a collection of those too. So some dairies kind of stuck with the same one, and some would change it frequently. Like down there, there's a ton of variations of different bottles. And it was all advertising. Just like no different than business today, changing things up to keep it fresh. They did the same thing back then. Round is how everything started. They were all round bottles. But then over time, they went to a square bottle. That was a little easier, save some room in the refrigerator. That was really gained its popularity after World War II. And then you also had the cream top bottles, so like this. If you ever notice, why is that like that? Well, before homogenization, the cream would rise to the top, right? And you'd have to shake it up or mix it up to get it to be, balanced throughout the bottle. The cream top bottle was a way that you could use a little scoop like this to get the cream out of the top of the bottle used for whatever else you want to use the cream for. It was just another variation on the bottle. Homogenization also allowed that milk to last But I don't know, I checked a variety of sources and they say that homogenization does give it a longer shelf life. So, which is why it has become the standard to homogenize milk, which is breaking the fat particles up. So natural milk has these big fat particles. Homogenization, you blast them into these tiny little fat particles. It doesn't change the makeup of the milk overall. It just changes the what it doesn't change what's in it. It just changes kind of the makeup of it, and it actually has a longer shelf life because of that. Okay. So there's some different bottles. You see, this is your standard quart bottle, which is the most common. And then you have smaller ones, you have the cream top, you have these what are called squat bottles, which are basically shorter and wider. And then you have the little different sizes, like these little ones, these are called gills. Just a little tiny single serving bottle. And then you have a pint and some other sizes. And some dairies only have one size and some have all the sizes. And this, I don't know if you're interested in this, but I thought this was kind of a cool graphic. You have your raw milk coming in. And then they obviously test some of it, some they send out for cheese making, but the rest of it has to go through this entire other process. Sometimes they pull the cream out for making butter or other things out of cream. You have your skim milk and you have your cream. Usually is actually separated and then put back together to get the exact percentage you would want. So you have your skim, your 1%, your 2%, and your whole milk, which is really like 3.97%. And they actually basically like separate all the components and put them all back together to get exactly what you want. So it is a very complex process. The bottle, so it's quite a process just coming from the cow. Doesn't go directly from the cow to the bottle. There's a lot of steps in it. All right, so now let's get into the specific cows in the bottle. So Calvert. Calvert has a milk bottle. Calvert's milk bottle is Cedar Farm. And Cedar Farm is still there. It still says Cedar Farm on the side of the barn. It's black now. It used to be green for a long time. And Dr. Elmer E. Brown had the Cedar Farm Company, and there were other names kind of throughout time. He purchased it in 1906 from Kirk, Levi Kirk. And it's located right there on Calvert Road. You can drive down and see it today. It's still there. It is owned by the Amish currently. He just purchased it within the last 2 or 3 years. The Cedar Farm bottle you can also see labeled as Rising Sun sometimes, but those are less common. But those are on the table over there. And then I also included just some information about the different farms. So here's a Cedar Farm advertisement. Talks about we'll deliver milk to the Northeast. Talks about the price for all milk, 13 cents a quart is what I believe that is. And this talks about the sale of the farm in 1920. But I know they kept bottling after that, so. What can I find? Chesapeake City. So
And didn't Cedar Farm have Guernseys?
I do not think they were considered a Golden Guernsey farm.
Not Golden Guernsey, but I think it's in Guernsey as well.
You do have to know that. Cedar Farm Guernsey Dairy. That's how she's written. That's where participation is. Even from my book. Alright, so a lot of farms, Guernsey was a big thing. It was very popular in Cecil County, a major Guernsey county. Chesapeake City. There are 3 bottles from Chesapeake City. Lawston's being the most common. It operated from 1940 to 1968. I'll show you a picture of what it looks like now. You can still go and see where the dairy building was. The family did a great job of preserving all that stuff. Beautiful white painted buildings with green trim. We'll see that in a second. The Kibler one was interesting. Now see, I like the mystery of it, right? So, Kibler. Nobody's ever heard of Kibler. There's a clue who Kibler is. So I'm going to try to find out, right? So I go back into the censuses and the newspapers. The Library of Congress has a great collection of newspapers, specifically the Midland Journal. You can look up online, just right from home. The Historical Society has the Cecil Waves all digitized, and some are available online as well. But you can look and try to find out the story. So Harry Wirt Kibler, he married into the Bolden family. And the Bolden owned a farm. This farm is located, if you go down 213 near Spears Hill Road, past Courthouse Point near Spears Hill Road, there is a barn that's brick. There's barely any of it left. It's all fallen down and burned up. That's where this was. And they just recently, I think, sold it. And I'm not sure who bought it, but I think they kind of sold it or something. But anyway, it was a 240-acre farm that this other guy bought in 1925. So Kibler only had it sometime between 1910 and 1925. And there's a whole story of how he went bankrupt and then he came back into the business, and there was a whole ordeal, which I'll show you here in the next couple of slides. And then Randalia's got an amazing history because the builder of the Chesapeake's C&D Canal, John Randall, won the biggest lawsuit in the history of the country at the time, millions of dollars, for being wrongfully fired for building the canal. Well, he bought this farm, which would be later called Randalia after him, and he has an amazing history. He helped design the railways in New York City and the canal in New York and all kinds of stuff. There's a whole book about him, actually. But the Howard family owned it and actually still owns it today. They've owned it since in the 1800s and still own it today, and they actually do bees and stuff now. But that farm is still there, and they had a bottle only for a rare time. Now, Wayne Combs told me an interesting story today. He said that somebody got sick from their milk and they were threatening to sue them, and that meant they just got out of business. That was the end of it. Which makes total sense. I mean, a lot of places did that. So this is another resource. Is the Maryland Historical Trust has write-ups about a lot of different properties in the county, and this was one of the properties that had a write-up, and it talks about how the Boldens had it for a long time, and then Kibler married. You can see Florence inherited the property, passed it to her husband Harry Kibler in 1911. He lost the farm by foreclosure in 1928. So it's just kind of neat to go in and see, where this random person with a random name on a bottle came from, and it's an interesting story. And the name Bolden is tied to a lot of areas. They had a lot of farms down in the southern part of the county. They have a lot of connections to a lot of areas. There's Lawson's. See that building is actually still there if you drive back on the north side of the canal towards Delaware, or that main side of the road. You can see the dairy. You can see some ads. I got the years on there: 1948, 46, 58. And Wayne Combs, you give full credit, collected some of this information, and I copied that out of a thing he had put together. So make sure I give him credit. This talks about Randalia Farms. This is an ad in the paper. Because what you do is you just look for somebody who mentions that name and try to figure out the connection. So they're looking for somebody to work on the farm. All right. Childs. You'd say, why is Childs on milk bottle? Childs isn't even hardly, it isn't a family. And it isn't. But Seminary Dairy was located at, where all the old priests live, at the Oblates, right there on Blue Ball Road. And there's, they're right up against I-95. But Seminary Dairy was a major dairy for a while. And you'll see Holly Hall also has a connection with the Catholic Church too. They seem like, it's given, I don't know if the priests actually worked the farm or they hired somebody to work the farm. I really don't know. Does anybody know?
You work with it.
Yeah, priests worked it. So I think they were looking for something for him to do. Same with the nuns. You'll see that on the So Seminary Dairy was in operation, and they have a bottle as well. And you can see this, they bought it in 1907. That's when they bought that property. That's why that's in there. And then the person who was, I guess, living there had a farm sale. Or they had a farm sale for whatever was there when they got there. I'm guessing that's what that 1908 thing is. And then this talks about there being a fire at the farm in 1931. And that's another common theme. Almost every one of these places had a fire at some point. That was a common thing to happen, and either that put them out of business or they built back bigger and better. How did we go? So this area was a really rare one. We only know of a couple of these bottles in existence, but there's a ton of milk caps. So you could find one of these like anywhere. But the bottle itself was super rare, and nobody really knew if anybody had one. Wayne was able to acquire one. It's on the table over here. It's a really beautiful blue bottle. And I guess the family might have some. But this farm was located just south of Reagan Road on Rock Springs Road. As you go through kind of Wingo to the north. Just south of Reagan Road, there's I think it's Benjamin's Landing, it's like a development called Benjamin's Landing, and that was where this farm was. Stanley Benjamin. And even on his tombstone, he has a milk truck. There's Benjamin's Dairy on the tombstone. That's really cool. That's a super rare one. If you have one of those or find one of those, I know somebody wants to buy. Earlville, this one is a mystery. Help wanted. Because this one, I don't know, I cannot find anything out about it. There were a lot of woolly hands who lived down in that area. There were like 10 brothers who were all living down in that area. And I don't know where this specific farm was, how long it operated. There's a bottle right here that has a 43 on it. So sometime in the 40s it was operating. But I don't know information. Anybody has information on the woolly hand Earlville bottle? Because there's lots of places down there that are that have been dairy farms for a lot of years, but this is the only one with an actual bottle. Here we get to Elkton, and we have several slides for Elkton. There are a ton of Elkton bottles. This whole area are all Elkton bottles. Elkton had a lot, obviously being the biggest population center in the county. Cedar Point is one of the rarest ones. It was located where the neighborhood is on Whitehall Road. So if you go down 213, Whitehall Road goes to both sides. Highland Elementary is over here. The neighborhood's on this side, and that's where the farm was, or where the neighborhood is, back in the back. And I don't know how long it was there. I only know that from word of mouth, and the fact that the map is able to. But I don't know anything about this farm. It's another thing I need to research more, or if anybody knows anything. I don't think it was in operation for very long. Paul Arbor and Son, we have the Arbor family right here in the front. And just from talking to them, they had originally started bottling the milk behind the Hermitage in Elkton, so like right in the town. There was a farm where the neighborhood is back behind there, and they bottled milk there, right? Is what I understand. And then they later moved out towards Bell Hill Road, but didn't bottle there, is what I remember him saying, right? Yeah. So I don't think they actually bottled there, but they were located in Elkton. They were called the Elkton Dairy. That was the name on there. The Elkton Dairy right here. Paul Arbor and Son, Elkton, Maryland. That's a very rare one as well. And then we have Holly Hall. So Holly Hall started under George Ashe. So this is Holly Hall, the big brick building right there by Big Oak Mall. That's falling apart. Somebody will try to fix it up, and there's new talk of that. But George Ashe started a dairy there, and he actually was the editor of the Cecil Democrat newspaper. It was a prominent guy. And a lot of these dairies were, some of them were started as a business venture by a prominent person, not just a typical family farm. A lot of them were by somebody who had money and then figured this was a good way to make more money. But then in 1923, it was purchased by Society of the Divine Savior, another Catholic group. It had something to do with missionaries, and they continued to operate the farm. Now, I know that you've heard of Joseph Biggs Highway and Rising Sun, right? Well, Wallace Biggs was Joseph Biggs' son. I worked with him when he was in his 80s at Agway and Rising Sun, Biggs Incorporated. And he told me that his father was one of the either laborers or farm manager at Holly Hall, And Wallace lived there when he was growing up for a while, right in Big Elk Mall. So, and he Joseph Biggs ended up being county commissioner later. So, interesting connection there. Holly Hall has a nice, pretty blue bottle, and also the slug plate discipline bottle as well. And there's an ad for Paul Arbor and Son, that's from 1938. And then this talks about them being sold the farm on Bell Hill Road in 1940. Yeah, this guy, Onizuck, sold it to Arbor in 1940. And then this talks about lightning striking the barn out on Bell Hill Road. And it does say, it damaged the barn and farm equipment in 1945. Did you know that?
I'm just an in-law.
Yeah. Yeah, where's he at? So here's Holly Hall, and there's George Ash. And there's Holly Hall, he was living there. This dairy did operate for a good amount of time. Really from the early 1900s up through the 40s. It was a pretty long-lasting dairy. And again, what do we see? Gold and currency. And then there's more information about George Ash when he sold the property in 1923. And then this is interesting because when Route 40 came through, which was in 1938-39, there was some dispute of the payment to take that property. Because I'm not really sure if Holly Hall was on both sides of what is now Route 40. I'm guessing it was. So it probably went over to the other side of the road, and then they ran the road right through the farm, is my assumption. Not 100% sure about that. Keithley Dairy, W.H. Keithley. It was located right on Delaware Avenue, kind of near Meadow Park. As you go near Meadow Park in Elkton, on Glen Mary Road. It's a road right off of Delaware Avenue. Drive back in there. He leased the farm from a guy named John Terhune of Cleveland, Ohio, actually owned it. There's an article that Paula did way back when in Cecil Soil that talks about the history of this dairy. I have a picture up here in a second. Yeah, there it is. So here's another Bolden involved. He's a worker sitting on a milk truck. I thought that was a cool picture. And the whole Keithley dairy right there in Elkton. Laurendale Barksdale is the one closest to here. So where the Gore plant is, as you go north on Appleton Road, right before the railroad tracks, there's a Gore plant on the right. And that is where this farm was. Laurendale was called first, and then it later became Barksdale. Two brothers-in-law, Warren Jackson Haynes and Frederick Wilson, who both were the sons of lawyers. So they had some money. And Haynes married Wilson's sister, whose name was Lauren. That's where the name Laurendale comes from. They operated a dairy, and they were in the newspaper all over the place, from 1911 to 1916, and then it all came crashing down. They kind of came out strong, and obviously, like I said, they're sons of lawyers, they had a lot of money, they're advertising, they're hiring people, they're doing all kinds of stuff to put themselves in the paper. There were a couple barn fires, and then Wilson ended up moving away, and Haynes was kind of left, and then he ended up selling the farm. So it was actually owned by a Casio before the Casio Mill Road. A Casio before the Hayneses bought it for like a long time. But it was actually on both sides of the road. So you had the Gore, where the Gore plant is, but then also where Cargill is across the way. That all was part of the farm too. It was a really big piece of property. And like I said, later it became known as Barksdale. And there's a Barksdale Lowell. Laurendale Lowell, super rare to find because it was only around for 5 years. And it says 15 on the bottom of that. So that's a really old one. And then, interesting connection to the Farm Museum with this one. Thomas Marion Lindell, we have a T.M. Lindell bottle. he operated a dairy off of Ricketts Mill Road, which is now where the Heath Farm is, Flint Hill Farm. And you see it's like all the no trespassing signs down this long lane. That's where that was. And he only operated it there for a brief time. His brother operated Locust Grove Dairy in Delaware. So that was a really prominent dairy off of Kirkwood Highway in Delaware, in what's called Marshallton, which I don't really know that anymore. But then he actually moved from the Ricketts farm and operated a dairy farm here, right here on this property, before Gates bought it, before this barn was built. There was another barn out here that had been there since the 1800s, and he operated a dairy here. But as far as I know, a bottling happened at the Ricketts Mill property. But I can't say for sure. It's possible this was right here on this farm. We don't know. But he kind of traveled around as a more like a tenant farmer. He didn't own the property. He was leasing the land and then bottling milk. So that's an interesting one for sure. There we see. This is a picture of the Larndell Farm house, residence of Warren J. Haynes. I mean, he was seen as a pretty prominent person. And then we see 1920 is when he sold it. This talks about the brother. He accepted a job with the DuPont Power Company in Williamsburg, Virginia, and left. And then this one's the Lindell Farm, 1915. Talks about the dwelling was totally destroyed by fire on that farm out on Ricketts Mill Road. So, I mean, fire was a part of that. McCleary! I don't know, have anybody ever heard of McCleary? So, McCleary, I don't know if Neil wants to say anything, but Calvin McCleary, 1907, 1974, located at the end of McCleary Road, right in Fair Hill. They still live there today. Neil, where's your name? Mary's in the back.
On the corner.
And according to newspaper articles and things that I found, the milk route probably even started with Calvin's father, right? T. Frank McCleary. As early as the late 1800s, and they still own the farm. Do you remember anything about any of that? Not to look up the
Carrying bottles all around.
Used to carry things all around. You remember shooting some of them, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so, that was we have two variations. You have the Calvin W. McCleary bottle, which is your flood plate bottle, and painted McCleary's bottle. Which are there. Mitchell's Dairy was only in operation for a short time, as far as I can tell. Henry H. Mitchell, who later became mayor of Elkton, operated this dairy. He later sold out to Abbott's Dairy, but he kind of stayed on as the manager. But he also had like a partnership with Newton, who they ran like an ice cream, and you can see right here. And this actually shows the building. Kind of cool. But they deliver ice cream by trucks to any place in Cecil County. So there's your E.D. Newton, Morris P. Newton, and then H.H. Mitchell. And they were involved, and then Abbott's Dairy took over and kind of bottled it. None of the Abbott's Dairy, they just say Abbott's Dairy. They don't say the location, because they were located all over the place. And when we get to Rising Sun, you'll kind of get a little more on that story of how a bigger company would come in and take over somebody's roots and bottles, but they wouldn't necessarily have a Cecil County name on the bottle. It would just be that the big company taking over. And then we have Pleasant Valley. If anybody knows anything about this, I want to know, because I cannot find any information on Pleasant Valley Dairy in Elkton, Maryland. The only thing I've ever found is there was information about a Gilpin who had passed away, and it said something about his property being called Pleasant Valley, but that's the only thing I could ever find. And I have not seen any of those around. They're not a super common one. Right here. But that's a really rare one. And then Springhead was also Linton F. Troop. It's the same place. If you go on Elk Mills Road, where Russell Road comes off, there's a big red barn on the hill there. It's painted Pony Ranch now. They have horses. And that was where this farm was. It was operated as Springhead under the Naudane family for a while, and then Litton F. Truitt got it in 1916, and started bottling under his name, Litton F. Truitt. And there's the barn's still there, there's a development there now as well. And this article that was from Cecil Soil as well talks about the Truitt family and what she remembered. It said she was 20 when they sold the farm, she was 75, and this was 50 years ago, so a while ago. Another one that's neat is Springvale. Springvale was owned by Benjamin or Joseph Ben Decker, who owned the Victory Sparkler Company. So if we know Triumph Industrial Park along Luball Road, there's a Zeitler Lane just up from that. That's where this farm was. It was 332 acres. It was sold. He had all kinds of legal issues. Ben Decker did. Joseph Benjamin Decker had all kinds of legal issues. He was in the paper all the time. I mean, he owned a sparkler company, so things were blowing up frequently. But he had a lot of things in the paper, a lot of disputes, sale issues, and things like that. In 1931, Pete Zeitler, who later ended up farming in Glasgow, and that's where Glasgow Park is now. That's the Zeitler farm. Bought that. That's why it's called Zeitler Road, and had a really big farm there for a number of years. But that was known as Springvale. And I don't know if Zeitler actually bottled under that Springvale name or all Springvale bottles come from Decker's time in charge. I'm pretty sure he did. But here's some interesting things. There's your court hearings about Decker and somebody not getting paid. An employee of Mr. Decker at the Springvale farm was taking up to Upton when his wagon was struck by a train at Blue Ball Crossing. Mr. Byer was injured, and then there was a dispute with insurance, he didn't want to pay, and all that stuff. But then that was also a Guernsey farm. It talks about Pete Zeitler purchasing it in 1931, and then being a prominent member of the Guernsey Cattle Club in 1936. So, and they had come from Germany over here. Wallace Williams and Brantwood. So really, Brantwood was first owned by Frank E. Williams, who was an editor of the Cecil Whig. Editors of the Cecil Whig. His son was Wallace Williams. Wallace Williams ended up serving in the House of Delegates at some point. Somehow involved in politics. And they had Brantwood Farm, which is where Brantwood, the county park is now. It used to be Brantwood Golf Course, now there's a county park there. And there are, if you go down 213 off to the right, you'll notice there's big white barns that are off to the side. That's where the dairy part was. They also operated the Milk Bar, which is now Baker's Restaurant. So Baker's Restaurant started out as the Milk Bar, and then in 1958 it was bought and then turned into a restaurant. That was a big dairy business. The Brantwood bottles, you had the slug plate, but then you also have the painted, but then on the back of some of them, it says Newark Dairies, because there was a merger at some point and the two merged together as one business. But they operated for a good long time in that area and were a prominent dairy. And there's a picture of the Milk Bar from Brantwood Farms out front. A couple gas pumps. There's your cap. This is Brantwood, and that house is still there. It's part of that. It's surrounded by the park now. That's owned separately. But he was editor of the Cecil Whig, another Guernsey farm. State senator, there you go. He was in politics. But again, what do we have? Fire destroys the large barn. I mean, it was happening all the time. Northeast, moving along here. Armour. If you ever heard of Atlee Armour, he was really into the horse racing, or Chantilly Golf Course. That's where this was. They owned kind of all that property in that area. The father, James T. Armour, was born way back in 1854, but he kind of started the dairy business, and then the kids kind of carried it on. But then later it turned into the golf course in the 60s. Maple Shade is kind of interesting as well, because it was another kind of like random guy with some money business or money-making opportunity. Cress Albert Beamer came down from Aaronsville, Pennsylvania, and he bought a farm that is now where the Jacob Tone School is now, that Ralph Hofstadter later bought. That is where that farm was, Maple Shade. And they had a little model. They were Jersey though. They were Jerseys. They got Jerseys. And he ran for county commissioner in 1942. I don't think he won. And then he sold it in 1944. So he lost and then left town. But he was there for 10 years roughly. Mearns, which is a really common county name, Rising Sun Calvert area, but also northeast. This one was Charles T.F. Mearns. The farm was located on Mechanics Valley Road. So if you go from Route 40 up Mechanics Valley Road, there's still a barn off to the right side, and there's a house that's kind of in ruins off to the left side. Those were actually two brothers, two Mearns brothers. The one on the right was not this one. The one on the left was this one. And he was in the Maryland House of Delegates, and he bottled milk out of there for a short time. Very early, very rare. Super hard to find that one. Let's see what the 13, no, 43. 27. 1927. So his son took over, I know, and I think I was never sure if it was him or his son that bottled milk, but now that I see when he follows it, 27, it has to be the son. Piney Creek. Piney Creek is down on Old Elk Neck Road. There's a Piney Creek Lane down there, right up against the water, a beautiful farm, owned by a very prominent family, the Henrys. He was a doctor. They were known for their jerseys. Here we have our armor information. And then here's a Beamer. And another thing that was really common is having a cattle show. There were cattle shows held right here. I have papers that talk about Hoagland Gates, who was the owner of this farm, having specifically Jersey Cattle Club shows right here. He was a prominent Jersey farmer. And Beamer was in on that, especially in the 30s. The 30s was like the heyday of time to show off your Jersey cows, take them all around the country. They put them on a train and go to somewhere to show their cows and show off what they had, because of course they're looking to, sell, the sire and, make sure that the bloodlines are strong. Really kind of showing off the best of the best. And they would travel around and do that, and Beamer was involved in that. And then here's Piney Creek. It's a little right up. You see the cap there. We're all Jersey milk. That's what it says. 1919, but he had, Berkshire hogs and I think Percheron horses and all kinds of stuff. And there you go, barn fire. And of course, now don't get me wrong, that's what makes the paper. So that's common in there. But a lot of these places didn't have the fire. That barn is still there. There's still that L-shaped barn there that was kind of reconstructed after. It was a really big, nice barn. This talks about erecting. This picture is later, but it also burned in 1920. This was a later fire, so it burned a couple of times. Got something to say about that. Again, it's kind of an example of a wealthy guy who kind of had his hobby farm and then would hire somebody to manage the dairy and bottle them up as a money-making opportunity. Perryville. Now this one is kind of a weird one because this is actually the book that the Milt Diggins, right? Yeah. Milt Diggins put together a book of Cecil County, and this was in there, and it talks about Joseph P. Wright selling milk from his Richmond Hill farm. Well, there's a Rich Hill bottle. So I don't know if that's the same place or not. But that's the only hint I have. However, the Rich Hill bottle has a K on it, not a W or any of those letters. So that one is kind of a mystery. I don't know what the deal is with that or where it was. Same with the Lynch bottle. I don't know anything about that. It just says R. Lynch Perryville. I have no other information. I cannot find anything else. I couldn't even find a Lynch in the census. So I don't even know if he was only there a short time, didn't get captured there in the census. But the other main dairy in Perryville was Chesapeake View, or Friendship Dairy, and that's where Furnace Bay Golf Course was. Furnace Bay Golf Course, that was a big dairy. F.L. Rowland was also a doctor, and then he sold the farm, and it became Chesapeake View. And it talks about the property here, and there's actually, this is the sales flyer when they sold the farm. And it's got, I mean, very professional, and this would have been a high dollar thing back then. They offered it sale for $80,000, which was a lot. And you can see the barn, the houses. You've got a superintendent's house, so we're talking about, a really fancy main residence. And then you had the workers, and they kind of, had somebody who managed the dairy. But this building is still there at the golf course. Port Deposit. So Kimball, or Maplewood Farm. If anybody remembers Dot Ryan, or Dorothy Ryan, she was involved a lot with the Makers Club, 4-H and stuff like that. This is her father and grandfather. She's passed away now. But he was an employee of Jacob Tome, and he actually married like a Tome cousin. Everything for deposit falls around Tome, as you can imagine. And this farm was located on the side of Liberty Grove Road, just below the Canal Road, and it's all like a neighborhood now. But it was a really nice farm. He was involved with the bank in Port Deposit, and pretty wealthy guy, and pretty successful. And that theme kind of continues with Mount Ararat. Really, Mount Ararat was actually, well, I don't know if it was first, maybe not. But around the same time, Mount Ararat. So Mount Ararat is still a farm out in Port Deposit. They don't milk cows anymore. I believe there's still some cows there. I think Miller's have some cows over there. So
And the
they
Mountain
farm it.
University has.
But Mount Ararat as a dairy was started by Dr. Joseph France. Dr. Joseph France was very wealthy because he married Jacob Tome's wife. He married the richest woman in Maryland. Yes, Emily knows all about that. He's a really
I
smart
can tell you
guy.
all the gossip about this man.
Yes, Emily's been researching this, and she's found all kinds of gossip because he also then had a later second Russian wife who then tried to divorce him and take half his money, and she only was married to him for like a year, and it was a whole thing. But he started the dairy there, and in 1905, and then he later decided to sell the farm to Frank Donaldson Brown, who was a DuPont General Electric executive and also married to DuPont too. But super smart guy. He purchased the farm in 1936, and then he kind of started bottling up again in 1939. There was possibly a gap. I don't know if Emily found that or not, but I kind of, in the record, there seems to be some sort of gap in the 30s, where maybe they stopped for a while and then started up again. But they still own the property there, and the dairy continued operation bottling until 1979. So that was like the latest one in the county. Everybody else was done way before that. In terms of having a label bottle, that was years with moments and stuff. The Brown family still owns it. It's off of Route 222 there. As you head into Port Deposit, if you're not familiar with that. And they were, of course, another Golden Guernsey. That was their claim to fame, the Golden Guernseys. Interesting thing on Joseph France is he said, there's a newspaper article, I don't know if I put it in here. Yeah, here we go. So this talks about France selling its 547-acre farm, giant farm, to Donaldson Brown, and then, which Donaldson Brown then built a mansion on top of the cliff, and that's still there today, and University of Maryland owns that now. But it talks about Yeah, 200 registered Guernsey cows, which for that time was enormous. I mean, that's there's something about he wanted to just get into regular farming. He's like, I'm gonna move and I'm just gonna become a regular farmer. I'm getting into this bottling business and all that stuff. And he ended up buying what he called Cloverdale, which is really Anchor and Hope Farm now. Now, what's it called Anchor and Hope before he called it Cloverdale?
Well, I have a very long answer if you want to hear it.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we can go back. So, I don't want to keep people all day. But he moved over there. He only lived there for 3 years and then he died. And there was a whole issue with Dr. Joseph France, which is a very interesting tale. Because his tome wife died, and then he, of course, inherited all the money. And then his Russian bride tried to it's a whole thing. You think things are different today? It's all bad. There's nothing different. Everything is the same. History absolutely repeats itself today. We'll come back to Nick Kimball. I got some stuff to show you there. But Shady Lawn, Brian. So there's an article in the Whig several years ago that I think Paul maybe even wrote. Did you write that? Maybe, I don't know. About the hog farm and this. There was this great conspiracy that this guy named Hogg, he made his money swindling people basically out west. He was invested in the railroad. He came back. Actually, I think Joe Gardner.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, Joe Gardner. So he swindled all these people, and then he took all this money that he had swindled out people and built this giant estate out in Port Deposit, very close to where Old South Smokehouse is now. If you're not there, the corner where that big Cummins Tavern is, and Marshall Bus Company, all right there. He built Cecil Manor, a giant estate, and then it sunk into the ground. Somehow it was built in a way where it sunk into the swamp, and then it was condemned, and then it caught on fire, and then he tried to collect the insurance. Crazy story. So anyway, that same property is where Shady Lawn from William Ira Bryan, who later, after Hogg was there, had a dairy farm there and has a bottle. Then there's also Willowbrook. Willowbrook, I have no information on. That is another one I cannot find anything on. It's super rare. I don't know. Did you bring it?
I don't have one.
Yeah, Wayne doesn't have one. I don't have one. I don't know anybody has one.
How do you know it existed?
So that's one that is if you have that, you got a highly valuable bottle. And it says Willowbrook Deposit.
So how do you know?
Yeah.
How do you know it exists?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. One person has it. It's on a list as one person having it. It might be Charlie Yeager. It might be Charlie Yeager. It might be Yeager, Charlie Yeager. There's some people that have every rare bottle, and so it's a super. At least one person has it. It's on a list. This talks about Kimball. In business for 42 years. In 1941, they really operated for a very long time. Kind of right there with Mount Ararat. This is the house that was there. I'm pretty sure not there anymore.
Does it still exist?
The house does not exist as far as I know.
Hey, Mark.
Yes.
Are you aware when Bainbridge was operating, did they have their own dairy?
Not that I am aware of.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of. I don't think they had their own dairy. At least they
I
didn't.
think so.
They didn't have a bottle. Oh, look, there's a milk bottle like they're walking in the door. There's all about these bottles. So Mount Ararat, this talks about them. It talks about Dr. Joseph France operating it. And we saw that earlier. All right, now we're on to Rising Sun. Rising Sun. We have W.K. Bird. W.K. Bird operated a dairy from 1907 to 1940. The family continued to own that through the 70s. And this is located at the circle. When you go outside of Rising Sun and get to Tome Highway, there's a traffic circle there. There's that stone building right on the corner. That's where this was. He operated right out of that corner. Some of them are W.K. Bird, some of them are listed as Meadow Rock, and some are listed as both. It says Meadow Rock Dairy. and dairy as well, operated for a really, really long time. And interestingly, the farm right next door, so this is what kind of fascinating. If you go further down Route 273 through the traffic circle, first you have the stone house, and then you have a farm that's further down, and there's a big rock in there, and the rock is like split in half. Like everybody knows that rock, right? You would think that would be Meadow Rock Farm, but it's not. This one is Meadow Rock, and that one's called Meadow Brook. Which there is a little brook that runs through there. But Meadow Brook is actually that farm that has the rock, and they were right next door to each other. So like, I don't know how that worked, but they both operated at the same time. But Meadow Rock and W.K. Bird sold their routes to Cameron. And I don't know where Cameron was. For a long time, I thought that Cameron's was located right on Dairy Street in Rising Sun, where there was a creamery there, a condensery. But I have since found out that that is not the case, because there's a single line of ownership, which I'll get to in a second, of that creamery. But it says he built an up-to-date creamery in 1940, but I don't know where. And operated it for a short time, and then I don't know what happened to it. He died in 1951, so maybe it just died with him, I don't know. And then of course we have Kilby's. Kilby's was the last, they started bottling milk again and continued to do so until 2022. Located out that direction, and we have some Kilby people here today. But from 2010 to 2022, they bottled their own milk again. They've operated that farm since 1961 and still have a very large dairy farm, the largest dairy farm in Cecil County, but now operated by a different flavor clan. So here's your Meadow Rock. There's that house I was talking about, right there, 1 mile west of Rising Sun. And this is a kind of a neat article. It talks about encouraging people to return their bottles. Give me my bottles back. I need them. They're expensive. People are not returning them. They would have like collections where they would have a time where people could bring in like all the bottles, and even if they were like other places, they'd mail them to them and have an exchange to try to get the bottles back, because that cost them money. Every bottle they lost cost them money. So they wanted their bottles returned. That's when they started making deposits. You had to pay a deposit on the bottle to even get it. And some of the bottles, I don't think any of the Cecil County are labeled with that. But a lot of ones in like Wilmington and Delaware have bottle deposits listed right on the bottle. 5-cent deposit, 10-cent deposit.
Probably all have to cost.
Probably all has deposit on. Yeah, that's
I got it here. They have
Okay.
it. Has it.
Yep. That became a common thing. And then this talks about Cameron buying the Meadow Rock Brewery and establishing a dairy. And he's got an ad from 1946, and I have no idea where that was. Anybody knows? Please share. Well, it says Stubbs Hill. Which Stubbs Hill is?
I know where Stubbs Hill is.
Is that where Little League?
It's the road out of Rising Sun
Okay.
that goes past Kilby Creek, or what used to be Kilby Creek. What's that road? Hopewell?
Okay.
Wilson Avenue.
Oh, Wilson.
That's
So
that is.
So
Well, is that
Dr.
where Little League goes at?
Dr. Stubbs owns the
Absolutely.
house on the hill.
There is a Stubbs Hill Lane.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. Maybe that's where. Which would have been right behind where the creamery was.
Correct.
So, yeah, more to be discovered on that one. Meadow Brook, that's the one with the rock that I was talking about. That large split rock in the road. It was owned during that time. I don't know if it was operated during that time. They had Lowell, Woodrow and James, Meadow Brook. And there's a picture of the farm there. Talks about them having Holsteins, which is today the most common. Talks about even taking a Holstein to the fair over in Harford County and winning a prize. We'll come back to Cecil. Stevens, still owned by the Stevens family, or Sprout family now. That was located on Stevens Road, right up at the very end. If you follow 273 Stevens Road, taking all the way to the Pennsylvania line, that's where this farm is located. It is still there. Susan Knight, who's a member of the farm museum board, is a member of this family. There's actually a picture over on the wall because they're also part of the Nottingham lots. And Willowdale and Stevens, it's a really interesting. Again, look, damaged by cyclone. Always. Yeah, it did. Well, it might have burned. I don't think it burned. It just damaged it. But then there were lightning killed 2 lambs in the pasture. You know, that's what makes the paper.
I think the cyclone blew the fire out.
Yes. But one of the interesting things about Stevens is when. So we'll talk about the creamery now, and I'll come back to Stevens. So in 1906, P.E. Sharpless Company, which was out of Pennsylvania, might be Manchester County, Dave, was it?
Yeah, I'm related.
Yeah, related to the Peerless. Look at that, a Peerless relative right here. So I was able to find some good information. He actually came out of Chester County. He already had some places up there and expanded to Rising Sun and created a creamery and maybe, I guess, I don't know if they did condensed milk as well because that was really common back then too. But he had actually purchased a lot of his routes from Elwood Balderston. Balderston's had, obviously the apples and stuff recently, but they had dairy farm for many years out there, and I was always kind of like, a lot of the common dairy farms, the names that you see will, Wild Ale model. This is kind of an answer. I'll come right back to you, Dave. He sold some of his stuff to Peerless, at least some of the routes or some of the farms that were coming to him because he had a creamery, but he wanted to get out of it. He's like, I don't want any part of this anymore. This is a headache. So he actually sold to Peerless, who then, in 1924, sold to Sheffield Farms, which was a national mid-Atlantic, and they shipped all their milk to New York City. So like they would bottle the milk in Rising Sun and all their other places around. They had tons of companies or factories, bottling places, whatever you want to call it. And they would ship all their milk to New York City. Then Western Maryland Dairy bought it in 1942, and then it sold to Seal Test in 1956. It was operated by the Geitler family. And I did include a Seal Test colleague in Cecil County that came from the Geitlers to add to my presentation. The building burned in 68, 69, but then they reopened it and it operated in 1979 as Seal Test. All right, Dave.
Balderston.
Uh-huh.
I have a Balderston Kennett Square. I've never found any information on that bottle
Really?
whatsoever.
Really?
Balderston Kennett Square for the ad.
Okay.
I have never found it.
Because Balderston's came
It's
out of
interesting to see the name Balderston.
Yeah, Balderston's came out of Bucks County originally and then down to Cecil County, but maybe there's some that go in Kennett too.
Yeah.
You know anything about that?
Very interesting.
Yeah. So when Peerless was bought by Sheffield, because Peerless was providing milk to the community as well, but when they sold to Sheffield in 1924, Sheffield stopped providing milk to the community and it all went to New York City on the train. Because this was located on Dairy Lane, right in Rising Sun, right as you go out Rising Sun, near Little League Fields, near what used to be the Agway. There was a railroad track that ran through there, and this was located right next to it. Clark Supply Store, all that was right in there off of Dairy Lane. And when Sheffield bought it, they stopped providing milk to the community. Well, that gave a business room to Willowdale. They talk about Willowdale, and the family talks about in 1924 when Sheffield bought that, their business boomed because they were the local provider of milk, even though Bird was out there too. Willowdale provided a lot of milk, like 1924 and on, because of that purchase. That was kind of neat. There we go, Woodrow James. There we talk about Seal Test and Ray Geitler owning that. Talks about the Sharpless, creamery building. Now that says building in Hunter's Mill. I don't know.
That'll be down there just outside of Rising Sun towards Route 1.
Is that like Slicer's Mill sort of?
No.
Different.
Down that little trailer park and stuff.
Oh yeah, okay.
Get down past the post office.
And there's a picture of the condensery that came out of that book by Bill Diggins. And you can see all the cans. Look at all the cans lined up. There. I mean, it was quite a facility. It's a big building. You wouldn't know any of that was there, looking today. That's Stevens. Okay, and then we've reached near the end here. We've gone through all the towns, and there's a couple more. So Dean Shippey, great collector of bottles, the king of milk bottles, I like to call him. So he brought 2 bottles for us. There are 2 other dairies that I know of, and there may be more, that were in Cecil County, but these 2 are labeled Newark because they were in Fair Hill. Newark was the most populous place nearby. Breezy Heights was located right on the state line. Drew Willis's farm, there used to be State Line Farm, located there. It used to go all the way over almost along Egypt Road. That was a farm called Breezy Heights that J.S. Pryor operated for a very short time. They have a milk bottle out there. And then Grand View was the Zebley farm off Jackson Hall Road. The barn burned down and they stopped bottling, is what I found from the articles. And there are other 2 Grand View bottles over there, which are really rare as well. And they're labeled as being Newark, even though they were in Cecil County.
Mark, was the Breezy Heights right there opposite Letters kind of like?
Yes.
Oh,
Yep, opposite of those shorts.
And Mark, actually, they weren't Maryland addresses because
Correct.
like Nottingham, like Northern Rising Sun had Nottingham addresses and like Fairhill.
Yeah, like I
Fairhill
know
would have New
Howard
York
Skinner,
addresses.
Howard Skinner used to live down the road from me, had a Newark address up to the center. So that's true. Then we get into caps only. There were some places that only had caps and labeled, put it on a blank bottle and just a cap. And then of course you also have places that were, as Bud Moore was telling me earlier, they bottled in a blank bottle with a blank cap. They just put it in the bottle, there was no label. So it wasn't that these were the only people bottling milk, they're just the only ones that actually paid to have their bottles labeled and marketed, and maybe were, I guess, maybe a bigger company, I guess you could call it. But Elk Landing had a dairy, and there's a cap for Elk Landing, but there's no bottle that we can own. And then my very last slide, put a pitch in for the bottle show, or not bottle show, it's really the Bottle Collectors Show and Sale. It's our 50th one at Singerly Fire Hall on November 5th. That's Sunday, 9 to 2 a.m. or 2 p.m. 9 p.m. 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Sorry. Hey, we'll go to 2 a.m. That's a Singerly Fire Hall, so if you're interested in models, it's a great place to come and you can just learn about them. And then I have a handout. I'm going to pass those around for the model show. And then I also have a handout that kind of summarizes all this stuff that I just talked about. So you can study that at home. Now I got a quiz question for you before we're done. How many non-Amish dairies still exist in Cecil County?
1, 2, 10.
So we have, anybody know? What would you guess? 6. Remember there were 550 in 1930. Come on now. Alright, so this was the list I came up with. You tell me if I'm missing anything. We got Kilby's, Crothers, Millers, Underwoods, Horst, 2 Muhlenbergs, Martin England, Schrader's Navy milks a couple still. They only milk like a few. They're getting out. And then Nex. That's it. I have Nex are not on anymore. All right, so we're down to 9. There you go. So out of 550 in 1930, we're down to 9. And but there are a lot of Amish farms that are milking cows now. There's probably another 10 of them. So yeah, so at least 20. But they're milking a smaller number of cows. Kilby's milks how many? Do you know?
They're about 600, 600.
Yeah, 700, 800 cows in Kilby's. You know, Crothers is probably the next biggest.
And they've gone down twice just recently. Brothers, maybe is the next biggest. Brother. Put it down on the spot. But anyway, so none of the others are anywhere near as big as Doug's. So it's a difficult business, and anybody who grew up on a dairy farm or grew up around people on a dairy farm knows that that's a 24-hour-a-day job, 365 days a year. That's why a lot of these people were rich people who hired someone else to do that work and could afford their bottles. But I just think the history is neat. Hopefully you learned something, and I encourage you to look around at this, like I said, the best collection of Cecil County bottles ever assembled. And I also encourage you to go around and check out the museum. There's some displays over in the other building as well as upstairs. Certainly want you to look around. And do we have any questions about anything? Emily?
With all of these bottling places, they bottled only their own home milk. They didn't take in milk from neighbors or
So they did. So a lot of these places that had bottles that were bigger did bring in milk from other places.
And so the other farmers would drive over with their milk cans and dump it.
Yes, where they would go pick up the can in the lane and bring it into the buggy. Just a few, not a lot, but they might bring in some. A lot of them mostly were, from what I've been. And a lot of people would have cows that they turn butter in for their own use. You know, but they weren't necessarily selling it. Now, do you remember when you bottled milk, were you selling it to people nearby? Yeah. So, just right as close as you can get them. Yes, sir, in the back.
I have a question.
Yes.
I was a kid. They told me the unmarked milk bottle was a general bottle that any store could sell the milk without the name on the bottle. Is that correct?
I don't know.
I'm from Pennsylvania. I'm a Dutchman.
Yeah, I don't know. That would make sense, I guess.
Another question.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, they told me either Seal Test or Cloverdale bought each company, one company out of another. Do you know that?
Yeah, there were a lot of companies that bought each other. There were a lot of companies that were intertwined. Seal Test bought other companies. They were more like national companies that would purchase these smaller dairies when they wanted to get out of it, and they would bottle or move to a different plant, things like that.
I'm from Northtown, Pennsylvania,
Okay.
and we had a Seal Test. And Priority, Rural Crown, 522 Dairy, and Long's Dairy.
Yeah.
And they had all kinds of bottles.
Right. Yeah, there's Cecil County, like I said, I mean, if I got into talking about every dairy farm in Cecil County, it would be like a 20-hour presentation, which I would love to have the time to do that. But you go into Pennsylvania, Wilmington had like 50 dairies of their own, just Wilmington. So, you get into Delaware, you have tons of bottles. So Cecil County is kind of nice because it's small enough where you can actually do this. It would be tough to do with yes.
Did each farm have to buy all of that equipment? Weren't there cooperatives?
So that's where like Peerless in Rising Sun comes in, because then people could ship their milk there to one place, because it was a hassle to have to bottle your own milk at your own place. A lot of investment in machinery, and even you have to clean and sanitize every bottle that comes through.
And the milking equipment itself.
It was milking equipment too. Yeah. So it was definitely not for everybody. I said, like at 550 dairy farms, we have so many bottles. So for people that actually bottled with labor. So it was definitely a big undertaking and a big business risk, like anything else that might pay off.
I would definitely think the heating process would be probably causing some of those fires.
Yep. Yeah. All possible. Any other questions? Did you have a question?
I should try to answer my question. I was wondering how much of an investment was it to do the cleaning and bottling?
I know a little more about West End Dairy because I ended up with their books and all that stuff, but it was just to maintain the machines that were bottling the milk was a giant cost, and you had to have somebody keeping an eye just on that.
What were the health? Yeah, I was going to ask, were there any health regulations back then?
Oh yeah, there were health inspections and all that kind of stuff they had to, well, at least once you got to the 40s, 50s. Prior to that,
got further in time, and that's of course why more people got out of it, because then you had more inspections, and of course people had come to the farm was inspecting too. And some people got out of it because of that.
I remember the milk inspector coming and seeing my
Yeah.
father's farm.
Sure.
You have 24 cows.
Oh, yeah.
They used to put them down in milk cans out on the road and they come pick
So
them
there you
up.
go, but he was saying you had to have your well water tested to make sure that it's good. A lot of things that come along with it. And
TB tests, Bank's disease.
Bank's disease, tuberculosis, all that's what I talked about before, where they slug it all over.
And that meant drawing blood from each cow with a prick test.
Yep.
You hear about when West End was bought out by Coombs, what George did with all the bottles? Cousin George told me that in order that the other dairies didn't know that West End was sold to Coombs Dairy, he went out and broke all the bottles there were 1,000 bottles on the truck. And Abe's mother told him to go out and break them all.
And then what?
But that was it, they were done.
Nobody would go the short.
Yeah, and I mean, they weren't seen to be as something that was going to be collectible. I mean, it wasn't like, baseball cards.
Right, that was
something else people like. Just kind of something that's emerged, just like any other antique that, people had an interest in. There's as far as bottle collecting, beer bottles, whiskey bottles, mushroom, what are they called? Store bottles. I mean, there's all kinds of medicine bottles. There's a whole collection of those. People collect them. All right. Well, I have. Thank you, sir. Please look around, and if you have any information to share or any corrections, please let me know.